Voting, boy, that's just a big can of worms for voting. Voting. I mean, I have a real problem with voting personally, but I was like against voting before I became Muslim. Right? Don't vote; it only encourages them. Right? I think local participation is it's necessary. In other words, I think that it's foolish for Muslims to be living in local communities and not involved in the local political process, because it affects us. And you can impact at a local level your situation in terms of zoning, in terms of rights of Muslims, in terms of school districts, in terms of, there are a lot of things that Muslims can do. And to say, oh, we're not getting involved, this is kufr and this, well then go, make hijrah. But if you're here, you have to deal with the reality of your circumstance. And in Sharia, one of the rules that we didn't go over is called irtikab khafad dararain, which is taking the lesser of two evils. So if you look in Sharia gives you guidance even when there's no guidance, right? It tells you what to do in circumstances even where, for instance, we would say that the political process that is other than the law of Allah it's a shar, it's an evil. But given that you have a body of Muslims that are affected by it, is there a greater benefit in participating in it or in not participating in it? And that is how the Sharia will look at it, because it can take the lesser of two evils. I'm just giving you an argument. This is an usuli argument. This is not my position. I'm just telling you that it's not black and white. It's not cut and dry. You've got some Muslims that say, haram, you're a kafir. If you do this, you're showing allegiance to a taghut, etc., etc. That's an extreme position, right? And it's highly impractical in terms of local government. Muslims should have good relationships with city councils, with the police department, things like that. Really, we should, because we're living in these communities and it impacts us. It affects us. It's important for Muslims to reach out to the police departments and do educational. They do it. Like we've done this in our community. We've gone there. I went there and I taught these policemen. I told them about stopping Muslims. That for a lot of Muslims it's a traumatic experience, because they're coming out of countries where police, they can just take them, literally. And boom, they disappear. Their family never sees them again. It happens in Muslim countries, right? So there are Muslims that have that psychic baggage with them. They get stopped by a police and suddenly it's like they start sweating and it has nothing to do with the cop. It has to do with previous experiences that are being repeated. The cop will sense this, because police are very sensitive to when somebody's nervous, right? And he'll start thinking, okay, this is a Middle Easterner, this guy could be a terrorist, seriously, this is what's going on. You're dealing with human beings with a lot of psychic baggage. And so going out and talking to these people, letting them know, the vast majority of Muslims you're going to deal with are law-abiding people. They don't want problems. They'd probably hope that you let them off if you stop them and don't give them a ticket, just like anybody else, And there's some, I know this Palestinian friend of mine, he was with this Palestinian guy that was literally just, kind of off the airplane or whatever. And this policeman stopped them. And this guy had never gotten a ticket because he was a Vietnam vet. He was Palestinian, he was a Vietnam vet. So he had these sob stories and stuff. But he told the guy, let me handle this. And this guy said, no, let me handle this. And he started screaming at this cop. We weren't doing anything wrong, and what do you think you are? And he had him out of the car and frisking them and doing all that. And this other guy's just shaking his head, Middle Eastern mentality coming up against, the cool kind of rational, seriously, that's the way they perceive it. It's a hot-headed Arab, right?
The reason that people tell me that they don't participate in voting and other things within the community is because that Muslims are not supposed to live in a non-Islamic state unless they're seeking education or some other reason. Either they're not permanent residents there. Is that true?
No, I'm
Yeah, see, I think a lot of people that bring these arguments again are, it's the Clark Kent syndrome. It's like, they're getting all the perks and they're not dealing with any of the. I really do, and they say, oh, it's permissible to come here for education, and they haven't learned their fard ayn. It's not it's haram to learn a kifaya knowledge when you haven't learned ayn. And the vast majority of Muslims I know in this country have never learned their fard ayn. So I don't know. I mean, I just think, there's a thing in psychology called cognitive dissonance, which is, when you're inward and your outward behavior, it goes against your inward beliefs. And what will generally happen is your inward beliefs are those that will shift in order to maintain a psychic integrity. So what happens is people start justifying, what they're doing there. And we are delusional creatures. We are deluded very easily by our nature. And you just have to be very careful not to get into that kind of delusional state where, and Muslims are as susceptible to self-righteousness as any other religious community, right? I mean, there's a lot of very self-righteous Muslims out there who, they're just filled with themselves and they think there's some innate moral superiority by the simple fact that they're Muslim, right? Which is not true. The Quran says, فَاسْتَبِقُوا الْخَيْرَاتِ. Allah tells the different religions, vie with one another in righteous actions. In other words, prove that you're better by your actions, not just by your words, right? So, what time is it?
The Muslims have to be taught like UK and South Africa.
What's that?
The Muslims have to be taught like how in UK, I mean, they are active participants in everything. So they've got their rights now. I mean, quite a bit of it.
In South Africa. Yeah. They're very strong in South Africa.
I mean, the community,
right,
the police and everything.
Yeah.
And even in the UK now, in England.
Yeah.
Well,
Islam is a recent phenomenon in America, really. I mean, there is a strain of Islam, particularly within the African American community. Islam has been around. Sunman Yang was telling us about a Sudanese man who was spreading Sunni Islam in the 1930s, Philadelphia. So Islam has been here, but it's never been a recognizable constituency within the American experience, and so we're really we are the pioneers here. We're trying to find out what our place is within the dominant culture, and so there's a lot of things to be worked out, and we're also unfortunately in a bad condition generally. Our level of education, not necessarily Western secular education, but Islamic education, is very low. Extremely low. It's low all over the world, and it's particularly low here, because we don't have very many scholars. We don't have very many people that are really, trained in Sharia, and so we've got a lot of learning to go through, and a lot of challenges.
Well, if you take that, I mean, as a big consideration, what is going to happen is you have people that do not know anything will take the top positions, and then it will be worse.
Well, I don't know what you mean.
I mean, there are people who do not know much about Sharia, who do not know Islamic law,
right,
maybe they understand a little or whatever, and then they would become big.
Yeah, no, this is
what is happening. I've seen this.
This is a big trouble, yeah.
So, I mean, therefore, those that know whoever, I mean, a small amount or whatever.
And then there's a lot of Muslims in the States that think that, we can just put everything on a computer and we can do away with, you can just literally work it out on your computer.
I think the major difference in trying to, I don't know if I'm going to use the word revive Islam in America, but there's a difference as far as the foundation or the origin of Islam, for example, in the US versus like South Africa. In South Africa, when the Muslims went there, they went for the specific purpose of da'wah. And here, when people come to the US, they don't come with that reason. So if we change that value, if we change that reason, then maybe we'll be...
You think they did initially?
Yeah, because there were a lot of shuyukh actually. The first Muslims who came were shuyukh, who established madrasas and so forth in Islam. Although they came...
I mean, weren't they immigrating there for work reasons and things?
No, they came in the disguise of or being slaves, but most of the slaves were shuyukh actually, come to spread Islam.
Sounds fishy.
I don't know.